is the DeFi Decoded podcast by 9 Point Partners. The ideas and opinions expressed in this podcast should not be taken as investment advice. Always consult with your financial advisor before investing.
Hello, and welcome back to another episode of DeFi Decoded. I'm Alex Tapscott, here with Andrew Young. We've got a very special guest today, Jacquelyn Melinek, the co-founder and CEO of Token Relations. I first met Jacquelyn back in 2022 when she was a senior crypto reporter at TechCrunch magazine. Before that, she was at Blockworks, where she was covering DeFi DAOs, crypto VC funding, and really everything that was going on in the crypto ecosystem. Jacquelyn distinguished herself at the time as one of the few journalists who was immersed enough in the industry that she understood the detailed, particulars of the technology and the business environment, but still brought an independent, journalistic mindset and attitude to all of her coverage. And I thought that was something that was, very valuable during the period in time when she was working there. Now she's taking her talents elsewhere. She's now a founder and CEO. Her new venture, Token Relations, is helping blockchains, crypto projects, protocols, and token issuers communicate more effectively with their ecosystem and token holders. They've launched their business on several different platforms, including with Avalanche, Aptos, and Optimism, and plan to bring on more chains, projects, and protocols in the next little while. Jacquelyn launched Token Relations in April with co-founder Anthony Pompliano, who's an entrepreneur, investor, and someone who has a very big following and a very outsized voice in this industry as well. So a great alliance of talents and backgrounds between the two of you, and I'm sure that business will be very successful. So Jacquelyn, what I'm super interested in is just sort of you telling us a little bit about your time as a journalist covering the industry. We have had a couple on in the past, but I mean, it's such a crazy world to have to cover, both because of the pace of innovation, but also, the types of personalities, separating the hype from the reality of like what's going on and where the value is being created. And, doing so in a way that the average TechCrunch reader or the average, business audience reader can actually understand without losing a lot of the nuance. I find that incredibly sort of tricky thing to thread. And I would just love to get your take on that. But before, I want to say thank you so much for joining us and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Alex. And I really appreciate that intro. It was definitely thorough. And it's been a long journey here. And I think to answer your first question, what it was like to be a crypto reporter, especially during the last few cycles, it was the way I kind of describe it is like it's remarkable in a sense, in a good and a bad way, because there's so much going on 24/7 that what you think you might be doing that day might not actually pan out. And the reality of you think something might be going well, it might actually not be behind the scenes. What we saw with like FTX and Terra Luna and other situations like that were just extremely unfortunate, but also a product of, I think personally, the founders behind the team. And so being a reporter in the space, it differs depending on the organization. I worked at Blockworks, I worked at TechCrunch, and there are very different operations internally. And having other friends in the reporter ecosystem, I know it's different at all the other newsrooms as well. And before I even covered crypto, I was covering energy markets for Bloomberg and S&P. So again, those newsrooms were very different than the other ones that I've been at in the crypto space. And I think the biggest thing here is that in order to be successful as a crypto reporter, you have to have a curiosity at the very least. You don't have to be extremely passionate about the industry. Yeah. I mean, it definitely helps if you're passionate, because people could see that in your writing and the questions you ask people when you interview them and the way you cover things. But there are, I think, fundamental differences between crypto reporters and normal reporters in the sense that this is an evolving, innovative, new industry that requires a lot of testing and curiosity, like I mentioned, compared to, political reporters or even like AI reporters. They probably feel a similar experience where it's an emerging technology and they have to have that passion in order to kind of excel in the space.
So what was the craziest story that you broke while you were at TechCrunch, or at least that you covered while you were there in your tenure covering the crypto space?
Oh my gosh, that is a good question. The craziest stories, I think ones that come to mind was the FTX trial. I was there throughout the whole trial for the 5 weeks that it ensued. And I was there at like 2 a.m, 3 a.m, waiting in line to go in at 8, sit there all day. You run outside, put out a story that you're trying to make original and different from all the other news outlets that are doing things. And then you go back in the room, you're there till the afternoon, and then you do it again over and over on a cycle. But that's not necessarily a story I broke because everyone was covering it. But there was a time when I was at Blockworks and Celsius, if you remember, Celsius Network still existed. And Alex Mashinsky, the founder of it, had my personal number. And he reached out right before Thanksgiving. And he was like, I have some news that I need to share with you. And I'm like, okay, what is it? And it was basically that the company raised money, but I think it was their CTO or CFO was also being accused of certain things that happened at a prior company. And so he basically wanted it to be a story that goes out, and like it was baked in, but he really wanted it to be about the funding. And I was like, I don't think that's gonna slide. Like we don't work for you. We kind of cover the news objectively as much as possible. And like I'm glad he came to me with that, but it was definitely kind of telling of like the type of character he was. And this was ahead of like the Celsius collapse and the situation that unfolded there. And I don't want to go too far into details, but you can imagine like how that went.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, it's so interesting. Like as a journalist, you want CEOs of companies to feel like they can reach out to you. You want to cultivate sources, but you also know that so often they've got an agenda and they're trying to spin you, right? So I mean, being able to manage that must be tricky.
Right. I think for me, it is definitely like a give and take situation, and like you kind of have to suss people out. I guess that's not a good technical term, but frankly, I am not in the business, and I never was in the business of screwing over good founders. So like there are some reporters out there who go out of their way to, find a negative angle, or maybe it's the editors on top of them pushing that. But I don't think projects that are doing good things deserve that. And so I always maintained good relationships, and like I did either neutral or when warranted positive coverage on projects and, up and coming founders that deserved it. And I think in the end, it kind of served me well in the sense that I covered them from an objective lens, but it was never like a, oh, gotcha thing or something for clicks, and it's just a game that you kind of have to play. But it's also like real life, like we're humans and so are they. And I really do value the professional relationships I've built with my sources, and I've never like exposed them if they came to me anonymously, or, sometimes people, when the FTX collapse was happening, I had people internally that I knew there reaching out to me about what was going on, but they were like, please don't say anything. And I respected that. And like, I could have definitely taken what they said to me and like, got a crazy scoop. But for me, it wasn't worth that. I think keeping those relationships and keeping those promises are so much more important than burning a bridge and getting like a one-time story. Like if you remember that Vice reporter who put out her DMs with SBF, like that was her choice. And it did pay off, it seems like, in the short term, but in the long term, I don't know if it was worth burning that bridge with him. That's for her to decide, of course. But
yeah, or for that matter, with other people who reach out to her, right, in confidence. Yeah, so interesting. So you got a new project. You got a new, your second act here, I guess, as a founder and CEO with Token Relations. And I said in the introduction a little bit about the business, but would love to hear from you. Like, what made you decide to leave the world of journalism to be a founder? Was it covering all these founders and thinking, hey, I could do it better than them? Or, covering all these founders and realizing they were all missing something? Like, what was the impetus to take that big leap?
Right. I really, really loved working at TechCrunch, and I got a handful of interviews and job offers that I didn't even reach out for while I was at TechCrunch from other media organizations. And that's not me trying to like stroke my ego in any ways. It's just the reality of like, there were so many opportunities out there that I could have taken that I just didn't, because what I had at TechCrunch, I really loved. I had the podcast, I had the newsletter, I was covering the crypto industry. by myself independently, like obviously through the organization, but like I was kind of leading the crypto coverage for them. And so it was a very special, unique opportunity. And I knew that if I were to leave that, it would have to be for something that I thought was extraordinary, that would further my career. And that was something I'm extremely passionate about. And being in the crypto industry, I'm very passionate about that, of course. But it also kind of stems back to the interviews I've done with founders and projects and teams behind blockchains and what they struggle with the most. And that's really getting their narrative out there, getting stories out there. So many times they would send me pitches that I simply can't cover it all. I'm one person, covering like a $2 trillion industry. And you just can't do everything. And it's a bummer because a lot of these startups and projects, et cetera, building on chain or even the chains themselves deserve that attention and they can't get it all the time. And so for me, when Pop came to me with this initial idea, like it was the initial idea was like being developed, and we've kind of established what it is today and what you kind of discussed. But I found it to be like, it's 100% like what would make sense for my next step. And it's something that I'm passionate about. I've worked with, the projects that we launched with pretty closely throughout the years as a reporter. I've made really good relationships with them. I understand how their ecosystems work, but I also see the value of creating this in a sense to reach new audiences and educate the existing ecosystems and token holders on what's happening on chain and off chain and how they could get engaged, activated, etc. Because there's so much going on that in a sense it's a problem, but it's a good problem to have, but it's still a problem. And that exists for, large blockchains, but also small ones. And up and coming projects, they want to reach new audiences, they want to engage their existing ecosystems, etc. And so we see this as something that like can be customizable across the space, not just for large existing blockchains.
So and that makes a ton of sense. I think a lot of projects are oftentimes too focused on the technical side and sort of not enough on the distribution and sort of like marketing and comm side. And then sometimes you have sort of projects that have like essentially no technology at all that are purely focused on comms and just kind of do really well there. Obviously, like meme coins is kind of like one of the obvious things there. So what can projects do better to like what are like the big sort of learnings you've had dealing with these projects and like what can founders do better to sort of communicate with their community better?
Yeah, I mean, they could come work with us, of course. But the problem right now is that a lot of communications that, projects across the ecosystem, it is doing like one-to-many communications. So what do I mean by that is like you're talking to your ecosystem through Twitter, Discord, Telegram, etc. And you're blasting out message to thousands, if not hundreds of thousands or millions of followers. And the problem with that is it's not segmented to audiences. Projects don't know who their token holders are or who's in their ecosystems. And we're basically doing that work on the back end for them to help them figure it out.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then is part of the idea to like reach out to them more like with more customized messages? Is it kind of like also just like literally getting on the phone with them? I guess, yeah, I'm curious, like what does that look like?
Like in terms of connecting with potential partners and stuff? Yeah, I think, exactly. When we first launched the company, we had like dozens of inbound messages. And for us, we really want to take like a curated list of initial partners to kind of build a customized solution and then work with them and bring it to the broader crypto ecosystem later on. And we really want to just introduce a way to gather these audience, get to know them better through internal technical processes, and in return, like enhance the relationship between these blockchains, protocols, etc., and their token holders, those who have a financial stake in the business or projects building on chain developers. And we'll be rolling out more partnerships in the coming weeks and months, as Alex mentioned, but that's kind of like how we look at it. Like the public markets have perfected their version of this with like earnings, shareholder letters, etc. And we're taking that old school traditional finance model and kind of rebuilding it in a crypto-centric framework that allows the ethos and the zeitgeist of this crypto community to like have a customized fit and a need. And so I think the reality here is like based on the conversations we've had with the people that we've partnered with publicly, but also ones we haven't publicly announced yet, is that a lot of them have that similarity of just not really knowing who's in their ecosystem, because that's just a product of like crypto anonymity, and also just like a need to engage better with them. Because when you put out a tweet or something announcing an upgrade or a partnership or whatever it may be, of course it'll get likes. That's amazing, but it's not really engaging that ecosystem to go take action and use or learn more about what's happening. And so if we could provide that kind of service and engage and activate them, we think they'll become more long-term holders.
It's so interesting because, in a traditional company, these would be distinct functions, right? There'd be the investor relations function, which would be, explaining the explaining the business to potential investors. And then there'd be the marketing department, which would be going and acquiring customers and marketing and trying to excel the brand, right? And in the token world, your users are your owners, and so the function is merged. And that creates this really interesting sort of dynamic where you're both trying to communicate the utility of the network and the app, if applicable, but you're also trying to highlight the value of being a long-term holder, right? Which can include the utility and the usefulness and the community benefits, but also the potential upside as well, right? Am I right in that description?
Yeah, I think you got that right. And I mean, for us, like the customer on that side of the spectrum is like anyone and everyone within crypto who has an interest in these chains that we're partnering with or projects. And basically taking what I've done as a journalist, making things that were said technically in a non-technical manner. So it could range from anyone from a developer to just someone who's passing by and wants to learn more about the ecosystem. They could understand what's happening and get to know the needs of like each ecosystem and like what's being developed on there.
Interesting. So are you able to tell us a little bit about any of the arrangements that you've entered into so far? Like it seems like, you're partnering with certain platforms. I mentioned at the outset, Avalanche and Aptos and others. I guess for some of those blockchain networks, they're really trying to grow their community by highlighting the applications that are building on like the developers and the applications building on their network, right? It's like that, to me, that seems like a big thing. Whereas, within a more mature community like Ethereum, the Ethereum Foundation per se wouldn't be looking to work with you, but there are plenty of projects built on Ethereum that would. So how do you think about sort of business development, which platforms you want to target, where you see the most opportunity?
Right. Yeah. So as we've mentioned, we've publicly launched with Optimism, Avalanche, and Aptos, and we have a number of ones that we are announcing soon. We're not going to say who yet, just because like we're in the legal phase of things and we haven't been given approval to say their names publicly. But you can imagine it's things of those caliber, but then also new projects, up and coming projects, ones that might have been cool last cycle that need to regain that hype, and we're trying to help build them there. And I think when it comes to the BD side of things, there's an 80% similarity across these projects that all of them just want to have better direct relationships with their ecosystems. And then there's that 20% difference that makes kind of, their needs and quirks different. And that's where the customization part comes into this. And, a lot of projects just need a better narrative out there. They want to grow and foster that relationship at a deeper level. And of course, like, in a crypto-centric way. We're not going to make it like super boring, and we want to kind of engage it in a way that makes the ecosystems want to be a part of this, and also so they can understand what's happening. And I think on the front of like who we're targeting, it's more, one, it's a mutual benefit, but it's also that they see a need for this and they're struggling to kind of engage their ecosystems. And that is where we could come into play and kind of bring them that all in one place to do it.
What like the biggest sort of the biggest change I'd say from this cycle compared to last cycles is sort of like the rise of KOLs and sort of like influencers in terms of just like reaching audiences and helping projects sort of in a lot of ways. Like KOLs are now sort of shaping the narratives themselves, whereas I feel like in the past it was maybe a little bit more organic. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just seeing it differently, but. So I'm just kind of curious, how do you think about working with KOLs? Do you think this is kind of just like a sort of a short-term passing fad, or do you think, KOLs are kind of like here to stay in terms of like the main shapers of narrative?
Yeah, I'm not too well versed on the KOL narrative, especially because it's pretty new. I've seen the articles about it and the conversations that have arisen. Frankly, I don't think they would be like a part of the token relations ecosystem and network and like what we're trying to build out here. But I mean, never say never. And I think opportunities are always open if it makes sense on both sides to work together.
Yeah, to me,
Yeah,
I think it's like Andrew, you mentioned this in your comments at the beginning. There's like this huge arbitrage opportunity where there are projects that have great, like technically very interesting, and also maybe have a really great community, but it's a small community, and they're not reaching like a big enough audience. And then there are
Mm-hmm.
projects that are reaching a big audience, but maybe lack some of those other fundamentals. I mean, to me, there seems to be like this really great opportunity to help the projects that already have all sorts of value in a way to reach that broader audience, to sort of to create better alignment between the projects that have, the largest market values and the ones that are actually have the biggest, community of users and most functionality and all the rest of it. I still think that there's this huge mismatch, and it's reflected, as an investor in the space, you see how when Bitcoin goes up, all or most crypto assets kind of go up indiscriminately. And that to
Mm-hmm.
me is a sign that as a whole, the market doesn't see too much differentiation between some of these different things. And then the flip side is that you see these specific cases where a certain chain has captured the zeitgeist and is really like finding its momentum, or like there's a big trend like meme coins, and they're skyrocketing with no or seemingly little underlying value. So I think we're in this environment where the efficient market has not brought itself to bear, I guess, on this. But maybe I'm thinking about it wrong. I'm like a boomer, so I don't really understand some of these things like meme coins. But this is a running joke on the show between me and Andrew, because he's trying to convince me that meme coins are the future, and I still don't understand. But Jacquelyn,
I could get behind
I don't
it.
know, do you see that sort of that value arbitrage as a big part of what you're trying to do?
Yeah, 100%. And I feel like, there are so many projects out there. And that kind of goes back to, when I was a journalist, I would get so many pitches every single day. And it's not because it's not because I didn't find them interesting, but I just genuinely did not have the bandwidth to cover all of them. And so what we're trying to build here is kind of the opportunity to give a platform to those projects, if they're within the ecosystems that we partner with, the ability to share what they're doing with the ecosystems. People can understand why it matters and also reach new audiences, kind of going back to the point you made before. I think there's so much opportunity on this front to kind of expand that to another level and like close that arbitrage gap that you brought up, because there is so much going on that sometimes people miss these things, or they don't even see like, hey, this is a really good project and you should go check it out. And I think for us, like when we're doing these calls, we're also, making sure it's a mutual benefit for us. We don't want to partner with a project that we think is, scammy or fraudulent. And it's a matter of like putting the best foot forward for our business and theirs.
Indeed. Very interesting.
yeah. And one last thing, I'm also really curious, sort of going back on Alex's point about how like you have a structured IR team in sort of the TradFi world. Do you think, and I know Mazzari is, and sort of Ryan Selkis, who's been on this pod, they're making this big effort to sort of standardize disclosures, standardize essentially like the IR function of these protocols. Do you think we eventually will move to a world where like protocol founders will be doing like structured quarterly conference calls, like releasing annual reports, maybe both covering the DAO, but maybe also the foundation? Like right now, it seems kind of fragmented, where some projects do it and some don't, and it's not really clear that the community even cares. So I'm just kind of curious, like, what are the best practices for projects, and what do you think the space is going to look like moving forward?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And love the Massari team. Love Ryan. Just went to one of their events last week and spoke at it. But when it comes to working with these projects and like where I see this going, I think it is extremely important for any blockchain or project with an ecosystem to have this relationship with that ecosystem. And what I mean by that is they should be doing these quarterly webinars and biannual reports, kind of like what we're trying to build out at Token Relations, whether or not it's with us. Hopefully it's with us, but in general, they should be doing this because ecosystems need and want updates. This is actually something that, I see all the time in comments. Like if you're watching a very popular podcast on YouTube, they'll be like, we haven't heard from them, or we want to know an update on this. And it's like, where are those updates? And hopefully that these quarterly reoccurring things can become the opportunity for ecosystem players to get those updates. And on the front of whether or not it makes sense for leadership to be the ones involved in this or other projects building on those chains, it really defers to each project separately. So like extremely decentralized blockchains like Ethereum, for example, kind of going back to what Alex said before, the Ethereum Foundation might not be the people speaking on what's happening on chain, but it could be like developers or massive projects, etc. And then like as some blockchains try to become more and more decentralized, they might not want their leadership being the ones talking, but the projects with the most prominence. But then on the other side of the spectrum, it's like a project that operates in the decentralized network, but they still have a team. And that's totally okay. And we want to bring those people on and have them lead the discussions and kind of shape the narrative as well and talk to their ecosystems, because that's extremely valuable for them to hear from them.
Yeah, like I can see a VC fund being like, listen, anybody we fund has to work with, Token Relations and maybe not.
Sold. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, or how about an ecosystem fund more specifically, like more to the point, if I'm trying to, because like, let's face it, a lot of these platforms, when they launch, they're trying to sort of astroturf, some growth, right? Like it's like, there's like grassroots, which is like authentic. And then there's other stuff where you're trying to prime the pump, and that's fine. It's like, listen, we're going to offer incentives for you to build on our platform. There's funding through this ecosystem fund and so forth. By the way, we think it's really important that projects in our platform start with best practices, know how to communicate with their ecosystem. So you should consider, working with teams like this one, like yours, right? So I can see that being part of. Well, I can understand the logic of working with starting at the ecosystem level or the platform level before like going to the application level, because if you can convince a whole community of users on a platform like Optimism that this is useful, then any project that launches on that might also consider doing it as well. I can think of a few platforms that should be speaking to you. I think that the Cosmos team needs to hear this pitch, because we're admirers of the tech and of the people involved, but sometimes there's a total misalignment between the knowledge or the notoriety, I guess, or popularity of a platform versus what's being built, and some of that ultimately comes down to marketing. I mean, it's such an interesting thing because, to your point, really sufficiently like the decentralized communities have no central mouthpiece. They're not, pushing one single narrative necessarily. And that means that they've kind of outgrown the usefulness of this kind of a thing in a way, but many others are. And I think a lot of communities forget that, before you can get to that point, you need to convince enough people that what you're doing is really worthwhile.
Yeah, 100%. And feel free to send Cosmos our way if they want to have a conversation, or, any other project that comes to mind. And I think even for the ones that have quote unquote outgrown.
Well, the thing about Cosmos is that there's no. Yeah, sorry. I was just going to say there's no person at Cosmos that I can like point you to. Right?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that's kind of like
I can put you to 50 people who are all in different kind of parts of that community. They're one of those networks that got decentralized before they hit critical mass.
We've actually spoken to some foundations teams. No, you're good. We've spoken to some foundation teams that, they're decentralized in that matter, but then they're like, hey, let's actually have you talk to people building on our chain or that are really big in our ecosystem because we think they could benefit from this. So that's like kind of another angle it can go. But again, like it really depends on the project.
Yeah, totally. Well, I think you're going to have your plate full, Jacquelyn. There's a lot of opportunity out there, and we're awfully early. It's been great hearing a little bit more about the business. You'll have to say hi to Pomp for both of us. I was on his show last fall. He's a great guy, and I think the two of you will go far with this business. And I would encourage a lot of people to learn more. So where can everyone learn more about what you're up to?
Yeah, so you can check out Token Relations. We have a Twitter. It's token_relations, and there's a link tree there with all the links that you can connect to. Or you could just go to our website, reach out to us through the contact form, and set up a call. Or you could check me out on Twitter at JACQMELINEK, Jack Melinek. And I'll be happy to talk to anyone about the business.
Awesome. And you also, are you hosting a podcast now, or have you moved on from those days?
I am actually hosting a podcast as well. We launched it at the end of April, and it's called Talking Tokens. And we got to get you guys on the podcast. But it's very similar to what I did at TechCrunch with Chain Reaction. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, count us in. All right. Thanks so much for coming on the show, Jacquelyn. Really appreciate it. Andrew, a pleasure as always. That concludes today's episode of DeFi Decoded. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, share, comment, all that good stuff wherever you get your podcast. It helps the podcast reach a bigger audience. Until next time, we will see you later. Take care.
The information contained herein does not constitute an offer or solicitation by anyone in the United States or in any other jurisdiction in which such an offer or solicitation is not authorized, or to any person to whom it is unlawful to make such an offer or solicitation. Prospective investors who are not residents in Canada should contact their financial advisor to determine whether securities of the funds may be lawfully sold in their jurisdiction.